PTC is excited to introduce Creo 10 in what promises to be the best Creo release yet, with new composite tools and enhancement to design for electrification, MPD, ergonomic design, and advanced manufacturing. We're very excited. There's been a lot of requests, so Paul Dye, our presenter, will take you over the latest features. Paul is a member of the Virtual Center of Excellence with PTC, and he specializes in the area of Creo, aided by his background in mechanical engineering, engineering design, and 3D modeling. And let me tell you a little bit about Novage. This is where you can find Creo on the Novage catalog. And what is Novage? Novage is changing the way designers purchase 3D software, offering more choices, great service, and best advice. So check us out at novage.com. Now, without further ado, I'm going to make Paul the presenter. Okay, we see your screen, Paul. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Barbara, for having me on, and thank you everybody else for joining. So again, my name is Paul Dye. I'm a solutions consultant and application engineer here with PTC, and I'm very excited to come through and talk a little bit about our release of Creo 10. And it's a lot of new capabilities, a lot of enhancements, a lot of things that you may not have seen before, and we're going to talk to a lot of different areas today. Looking at a brief agenda for what we're going to be covering, you can see we're going to be talking around design for composites, electrification, ergonomics, even just things for the standard Creo designers and engineers for productivity and usability. Anyone that's working in model-based definition, we have some enhancements and things we've added in that sense. Simulation-driven design is multiple different products that help us out there, and a few different areas that we've had enhancements, and also into manufacturing, both traditional with subtractive, and also in the area of additive manufacturing and 3D printing. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to drop those in the question and answer box, or the Q&A, and I'm going to go through and speak to all these different areas here. So let's go ahead and start off here first and foremost in the area of composites. And this is an area that more and more people out in the industry are beginning to work with. In the past, people would have thought that this was mostly just used for something like aerospace engineering, but now it's being used for automotive, boats, turbines, even bicycles. It's a lot of different use cases that we're working with here. And it starts primarily with the design of composites. Now, this is a big part of this, specifically into ply and core creation, as well as building out the transitions between each of the splies that you're building out with composites. And once you have those plies all laid out, you then have the ability to create the solid that represents that geometry. You can take forward from there. One of the other big parts of this is the simulation side of things. We're taking all the different plies and their definition, and we can integrate that in with Creo Simulate, see what we're getting from the structural side of things. You do also have the option to export those designs into a third-party tool if you'd like to as well. And outside of the standard types of analysis, you can also simulate the draping of these different composite designs. Essentially draping, say, a cloth over a given shape is what it would look like, and it's going to drape in a certain manner, and helps us to understand the stresses, the strain in that action, and really analyze whether or not it can be flattened or not. If it needs to be split up, you get to see a little bit more into that as well. And then to document all of this, we have plybook creation to create the 2D drawings. A lot of that's going to be working from templates, where we'll set up templates that lay out each layer into an individual sheet, and overall really automating the process of getting each of those defined. And finally, from the manufacturing side of things, we have the ability to splice up your plies, split them, and do darting if you need to. One thing I will mention with composites is that this is actually going to be included in the first maintenance release of Creo. So not in the very initial release of Creo, it's going to be in Creo 10.0.1. So by the time that you're watching this, if you're watching this after the fact, it may already be from within the tool. But if you're on the call now and it's a little bit closer to the release of Creo 10, it's actually going to be out in that first maintenance release of Creo. So in the very near future here coming up. But some very strong capabilities there that we're going to have, especially if you're working in the area of composites. It's definitely something that you're going to want to take and looking to see some of the capabilities of it. Now, moving on from here, we're going to be talking a little bit more so into the design for electrification. We've really seen a recent resurgence in the need for electrical design, especially as it integrates into what we're doing on the mechanical side of things. So it's an area that us at PTC and Creo, we continue to invest in. And it starts first and foremost with just some usability items. First, and a huge part of this year is going to be our new cabling tree. In the past versions of Creo, your cables, your bundles, your connections, they're mostly mixed in with the rest of the model tree that you're working with. But now what you have is a dedicated tree that organizes the information much better and gives you the ability to narrow down and search between each of those functional areas very quickly. You can work with dedicated filters and columns for each of the different views that you're looking at, and overall giving you better visibility into the structure of your harnesses, making it easier to find elements from within the structure, easier to investigate and validate the harnesses that you're working with, and really just making sure that your functional design is organized as much as possible when you're working with those harnesses. Now the next, and I'd say probably the largest area of enhancement that we have in the electrical world here, is with the added ability to split and merge harnesses. One of the big areas that this helps with is collaboration. Say, for example, you're working with a large harness and you want to be able to split that up. We can split and work with multiple designers on that. Helps you to be more efficient. You can do more work at once. And then once you've completed the work in each of the areas, you then have the ability to merge the harnesses back together into a single harness that you can then take forward from that point. So very useful there. There's multiple different use cases that it can really help with. So for example, say you have one section of a harness that would potentially be useful in a separate design. What you could do is split that individual area off and then use that in another design, or even just from the manufacturing purposes. Say your harness is getting large or complex, you can split that up to ensure that your manufacturing documentation is not going to become overly complex or crowded. So very useful tool there, and something that we're going to be able to use at any point in the process. And from an ECAD perspective, we've been expanding our ECAD integration over the past couple releases of Creo. And now with Creo 10, we've expanded this now to include the ability to import paste mask into our design. And then whenever it comes to ECAD holes, we now have the ability to define ECAD parameters to those holes. So this can be now added in, or they can be customized using an ECAD.hole file. So a few different areas that we've worked on in the area of electrification and helping us to build that into what we're doing from the mechanical side as well. Moving on from here, we're going to be talking a little bit more to the design for ergonomics. We've had a renewed investment into ergonomics starting back in Creo 9, and we've continued that and expanded that here within Creo 10 as well. First thing here, again, similar to what we were working with over in some of the other different areas, is just general usability and giving you the ability to not only use the dragger on certain areas of your mannequins or your models to move them around, we also now have the ability to define certain distances as well in that environment. One of the other things that got added in was the ability to measure angles between different joints in the mannequins. Say, for example, you select on one of the arms and then one of the lower legs. It understands each of those components and give you angle measurements between each of those. We've also expanded the reach envelope. So in the past, it was really just looking at the pointer finger, but now you can look at different areas of the hand, like the palm, the thumb, the middle finger. And it could even be combinations of those as well. So really a little bit more granularity that you can get to in that reach functionality. And then from there, a little bit more into the reach. Say, for example, you want to place the foot up on a step. You can now say exactly what part of the foot's going to contact that. So just more control overall on how that's being oriented. Another thing that we worked on here is the mannequin library itself. We are able now to rebuild them as inseparable assemblies, which helps us from the management perspective, makes it easier there, where it's just going to be stored as one object that we're going to be working with. And then from that point as well, we have the visual field that had some enhancements too. We have the ability to perform reflection analysis by looking at what we define as a reflective object. So for example, here, like a mirror, you can see that we can get the resulting surface cone that represents the visual field reflecting from that surface. One thing that it enables us to do is view that cone from multiple different orientations. Say, for example, we want to move these mirrors and angle them in different ways. We can see and understand how that's going to affect our vision, even see if there's anything that's going to be obstructing that view, and overall giving us a much better understanding of that visual field. So that's not something that you can either do directly from an object or even from a reflective standpoint as well. So really a lot of different areas that we improved there over on mannequin and the ergonomics. And now switching gears, I'll talk a little bit more so into productivity and usability. It's one of the biggest areas that we've had to focus on for a number of different past releases of Creo, I'll say. Just things that help the everyday designer do their job better. And one of the biggest things that we've had in recent memory is working with the model tree. And we've done a lot with that. We've done everything from adding in the design items tree, the quilt and body history view, and we're expanding on those here in Creo 10 as well. And it's starting with the improvement of reordering of objects, specifically within the context of our assemblies. Whenever you're moving items from within an assembly, you want to make sure that you're just simply reordering the assembly and that it isn't restructuring the assembly context as well. So that could have some unwanted effects. So we want to make sure that you're going to get now a dialog box whenever you make those movements to ensure that you understand the changes that are being made and you don't have any unintended changes happening without you knowing about it. Now, dragging and dropping in the quilt and body evolution trees has now also been made much easier, much more efficient. We added in support for columns and search and that history as well. General improvements made to how we display each of the trees that we're working with and control that you have in that aspect. And from a modeling perspective, we've also continued to work inside of the Sketcher tool. First with the project and offset. What you can do now is work with those from construction geometry. You can do each of those into construction geometry. We've improved the troubleshooter behavior to understand why something might be failing if it was set up incorrectly. We can now also include all curves in a feature that can now be an input into each of those commands. And then the same behavior is going to work for more trajectory-based features as well. From here, looking at the whole feature, simple holes can now contain parameters and notes along with them. We made a number of different enhancements in patterns, mainly focused at working with patterns in multiple directions, adding in additional controls from that perspective and different parameters that we can work with to drive those patterns is going to be a lot easier to work with. Multi-body, this was a huge addition back in Creo 7, and pretty much with every single release of Creo, we've been continuing to add to that, and it's no different here in Creo 10. One of the biggest things that we are working with now is the ability to split and use the trim feature. It's giving you more control in the Boolean operations for what parts of the bodies are being kept after an operation, if you want to create multiple bodies, and really simplifying the process a bit further when doing multi-body operations. We also did work on propagation. Say you go to subtract one body from another, you have the ability to propagate the color or appearances from that body to the resulting body. This could also be references as well. If you want to propagate those over, it's something that you can now include and make sure that you aren't losing any of that information whenever you do your Boolean operations. Looking on the side of surfacing, one of the things that we added in was to the warp capability. There's actually two new capabilities that we have in that tool. First is the stretch tool. This gives you the ability to stretch an object in a given direction. We can now do that up to a given reference that we define. Before, it just used to be essentially based on a dragger. We can now use, say, a datum plane, for example, if you want to move it up to a certain reference. And the other thing that we enhanced in the warp tool is the spine. We can now warp the model from one curve to another reference curve, and then it's going to deform the shape accordingly as well. Over in our freestyle tool, which we use for freeform modeling, we added in rotational symmetry as an input. So I can take an object and rotate it however many times I need to around a given axis. One other thing that we added in is the ability to lock certain areas of a mesh to make sure that whenever you build out something in freestyle and you like how it looks and you don't want it to change, you can now lock that area in the mesh so you don't have any unintended changes happening to it as you're moving other parts of the model as well. Now over in the style tool or interactive surface design extension, we made improvements to curve connections, specifically the smooth normal connection. And what that means is whenever you mirror a curve about a plane, the resulting curve connection at that mirror point is going to be G3 acceleration continuous. So very useful enhancement that we have in that sense, making that behavior work a lot better. And from that point, we also introduced box selection of control points that you're using in the style tool. So it's making those selections much faster and easier to make than it was before as well. Right, moving on to model-based definition. This has been a huge area of focus as well in Creo for a couple of years. And it was a couple of things that we've added in here. First and foremost was symbols. We can now relate certain symbols or surface finishes to other annotations that we have laid out over in model-based definition. That's going to inherit the plane of that annotation and essentially grouping or stacking those annotations together with one another. And of course, we have associated cross-highlighting between any of the related annotations that we have in that sense. So these are all just standard model-based definition capabilities that we're continuing to work with whenever it comes to symbols. And then looking at some of the specific tools that we have whenever it comes to model-based definition, the biggest one is going to be the GD&T Advisor. This is an extension that we have in Creo for giving guidance during the application of GD&T from within the context of model-based definition, as well as validation that what you're laying out has been done correctly. And we've seen some improvements here as well. That includes the general usability improvements in the tool. So improved semantic behavior, first and foremost, for the general profile information. So say, for example, you have a general profile applied to your model. Creo understands that semantically now and then can analyze the model accordingly. And as it relates to what we have in our standards, ASME and ISO that you might be working with, we continue to improve our compliance and detailing to each of those standards as well. Right now, over on the simulation side of things, we have multiple different areas and extensions that we've worked here, starting with Creo Simulation Live, or CSL. One of the biggest things that we added in is context support. It's something that we actually initially released in a maintenance build of Creo 9, I believe it was Creo 9.0.3, but it's been more fleshed out here now with the release of Creo 10. One of the main things that got updated in the context is the fact that previously you're only able to detect one-to-one contacts in the model, but now you can look at one-to-many, many-to-one, or any combination of those. So really helping us to enhance what we're doing in terms of how many use cases that we can use those contacts for. From there, we made general enhancements to the results that we're getting back, so making sure that you can see any of those results in a much better manner. Specifically to fluids, what you're able to see now is complete vector results. So that's something that whenever you're working with your fluid type simulations, you're going to be able to see a little bit more into those vector style results. As it relates to Creo ANSYS, we introduced what we call Creo ANSYS Simulation Advanced. Now this is going to be adding in a few different capabilities here. First and foremost, it's going to be with nonlinear contacts. We're also now going to be working with nonlinear materials as well. That includes hyperelastic materials. We also now have the ability inside of Creo ANSYS to do combined physics whenever it comes to structural and thermal simulation. A big use case in that would be thermal expansion, something now that you can work with from within the context of Creo ANSYS is using those different combined physics. So a couple different areas that we're working with there and looking to really expand the tool and the different capabilities that we provide to you with Creo ANSYS. And then over on the side of Creo Flow Analysis, we continue to see improvements there as well. We improved the indicators for your streamline displays, improvements to the streamline animations as well. One of the other biggest things that we added in was working with your post-processor settings. If you go through a study and then have your post-processing configured in a way that you like, you can now save that off and use that in other different studies going forward. So welcome enhancement that we have there. And from a standpoint of Creo Simulate, we now support multi-body type studies over in Simulate as well. And there's a ton that really goes into that, from interfaces between bodies to materials, mesh. So really a lot of new options that you have from working with multi-body there as well. Generative design is a constantly evolving tool that we have in Creo. One of the biggest new enhancements that we have is the ability to define rotational symmetry. This is a new type of design constraint that you have in your design criteria for generative design. It's something that we can combine with planar symmetry that we've had already up in generative until now. So it opens up the door to a lot of new designs that can be built out in generative. A couple other enhancements that we have, we added in support for point mass, remote loads. We also built out the capability of making some measurements from the hybrid or generative body that we produce over just to our standard regular geometry that exists in our Creo designs as well. So making the integration of what you pulled out from generative to everything that we design normally parametrically in Creo a lot easier to work with and working between the two as well. Right. Last area that I want to touch on, and it's a huge area of enhancement that we had in Creo, is around manufacturing, and it's both from the subtractive side and the additive side. I'm going to go ahead and start here first and foremost with the additive capabilities. One thing that we added in here is enhancements to our formula-based lattice cells. If you haven't worked with these are lattice cells that are built in a certain orientation and a certain fashion where they don't require the use of support materials to create. what we added in is the ability to change the density of those lattice cells depending on simulation results that you're getting back. So for example, say you go to run a simulation and you find that you have certain high stress areas. Those different cells that we're working with can now thicken in those particular spots, while then having thinner walls in the areas that would have lower stress concentrations. And in addition to that, we added in a few different areas as well. So first and foremost, we have auxetic cells. This is a very unique, it has a characteristic that represents a negative Poisson ratio that we have in our models. So normally if you have a positive Poisson ratio, whenever you have deformation with those cells, the model will essentially bulge outwards. But whenever you have cells with negative Poisson ratio cells, that deformation will actually go inwards. So it can result in some very unique use cases that we can play into, a lot of different areas that you can start to take into account, and just a lot that we're doing over with those formula-based cells and even just the beam-based lattices. That's also something that we're continuing to expand some of the characteristics and properties that you can change in that sense. Like I mentioned, we have that simulation-driven variability for our lattice designs that we're working with. And in addition to that, we also introduced an additional formula-based cell called IWP cells. So really just expanding the use cases that you can work with and some of those lattices that you can build out, really to at the end of the day, help us to do design better before we would ever go through to get ready for a 3D print or build out support or put anything onto a tray. We really want to make sure that the model that we're putting into 3D printing is optimized for that 3D printing process as well. So latticing helps us to get there. All right, finally moving on to subtractive manufacturing. We've got a big focus on expanding the capabilities that we have in our high-speed machining tool. We now added in support for barrel tools, allowing us to do wall and floor finishing tool paths. So those types of tools can get you very precise finishes while also requiring less passes of the tool. So it's going to be more efficient as well. Mill volumes, this has been a standard over in our normal NC tool paths. This is also something now that's been added into our high-speed machining as well. And this is something that we would use for roughing and breast roughing. As it relates to multitask machining, we added in a new CL player for displaying the tool paths that our model is moving through. We can show all the paths being calculated, as well as looking and checking for collisions and gouging. And then finally, for area turning, we have the ability now for cut com or cutter compensation to look at each individual slice rather than looking at it for just the entire operation. And for each sequence, we also added in a clear distance parameter to that as well. So at the end of each sequence, it can return to a certain distance before moving on to the next step. So many of these different enhancements that we work with, they're all customer driven. We're always trying to listen to what our users are saying. We're always looking to make you more productive, more efficient, and specifically as it relates to machining, and to give you a higher service quality there as well. Okay, so I want to wrap up and really just go back over some of the main areas that I touched on here today, so I can kind of give you a little bit of a look and see what that looks like in the context of Creo as well. But just really want to go back and recap some of the areas that I touched on today. So again, just to start, usability is going to be a big aspect that we're always going to see enhancements to. It could be the multi-body, like I mentioned, for propagation of appearances. It could be working over in the assemblies that you have for making reorder more efficient. Even areas like flexible modeling as well continue to be improved. So making your job as a designer as easy as possible. Composite design is a brand new enhancement that we're going to have in Creo. It's a very robust interface for building out those composite designs, for running simulations on those composites, and then automating the creation of your manufacturing documentation from that. So it's a powerful tool, plays a part in many different industries that you're going to be able to use that for. Then on the side of cabling and design for electrification, it's definitely going to work a little bit different from before, and for the better. You're going to be working in an overhauled tree, makes design intent much more clear, and with the added ability to split and merge harnesses, you're going to be more efficient when working in that areas as well. Same thing whenever it comes to integrating with your ECAD tools. You're able to bring in data to do what we need to on the mechanical side here in Creo Parametric, making collaborating between those two worlds a more streamlined process there as well. And then on the design side for ergonomics, that's another area that we've seen that investment into, making sure that your users are the products that you're working with, they can see what they need to, they can feel the things they need to, and then from a usability perspective, just making sure that they can even reach and work in the best way possible there as well. Looking on the side of model-based definition, it's another growing area, not only in the world of design and manufacturing, but really across the enterprise. We're adding in the tools from expanding our symbol capabilities, just the general improvements that we have for usability, making sure that you're getting things done quickly, and as it relates to the tools that we have that assist us there for the GD&T advisor, as well as the easy tolerance analysis, making sure that those tools are assisting with getting those annotations built out as well. And on the area of simulation, we're continuing to expand our partnership with ANSYS. First of all, in our high-scale validation that we do over in Creo ANSYS simulation, we're able to work with those nonlinear materials, hyperelastic materials, nonlinear contacts, combined physics, a lot of different areas that we're working with there. And if you're looking to get more quick simulation feedback, Creo Simulation Live is giving us more capabilities than ever before for being able to do that as well. And then whenever it comes to working with emerging technology, or working here within the area of generative design, that's another area that we continue to see enhancements there as well. So if you're going to be working with that rotational symmetry, you're going to be able to build out more models that help out with that. And just tie that in with whatever types of manufacturing that you want to use that for, whether it be for 3D printing, building out casts, or even just doing an extrusion process. And at the same time, continue to work with those different areas of manufacturing. So 3D printing, subtractive manufacturing, working with lattice cells, a lot of different areas that we're going to continue to see improvements to, whether it be for 3D printing, or even just for building out toolpaths over here in Creo NC. Always different areas that we continue to see all these different improvements around as well. Right, so that covers just about everything that I wanted to talk to today. Again, a lot of different functional areas that we've worked with and improved on. And again, just a bit of a look into some of the different areas that we're continuing to invest into and some of the direction that we're headed in as well. So hopefully give you a little bit of a better understanding of exactly where we're at with Creo 10. And like Barbara mentioned, this really is the greatest release of Creo that we've had up until now. So you're going to be able to do much more than ever before.
Thank you so much. Now I'm a believer. That was great, Paul. Thank you again. I will show you again on my screen where you can get the latest Creo 10 and a bunch of other PTC products, including MathCAD if you ever need it. And check us out at Novage.com, because Novage is changing the way designers purchase 3D software because of the huge selection and the great service. We're here to help, and you can call us anytime. Check us out and have a great rest of the day, everybody. And thank you again, Paul. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Yep, have a good one.